many sides to the coin, you know, and you have to really, the longer you go on, the more sides you show that are there to be unraveled.
Kids played the kettle of fish, and we went down and we listened to him sing and play, and that was the first time I ever heard him, saw him.
Do you remember anything about that performance?
It was interesting. It was hard to make out the words, but there seemed to be something magical there. You know, you had a feeling with him that you were in the company of somebody very important, even in those early days. He is quite a person, a very unusual, talented person. I loved his music. Some of it would make the hair on your neck stand up.
For the first year when Dylan bombed the whole year, the administration at Columbia was calling him Hammond's folly. We suits are supposed to be inclined that way. We're not supposed to recognize talent. So maybe the suits over at Columbia were even more retarded than we were.
I was 22 years old. I was the youngest record producer ever at Columbia Records. The sales of the first record called Bob Dylan, I think, I'm serious with this number, sold maybe 6,000 or 7,000 copies. It did very poorly. A successful album would be a minimum maybe of 25,000 or 50,000. The head of A&R didn't like the record at all. They thought that that John Hammond had made a major mistake. Subjectively, Dylan had all things wrong with him. He had these 6 to 8 minute songs. He wasn't the handsomest guy in the world. They were cookie cutter guys at the time like Fabian or Frankie Avalon. He was not a pop writer. He was more of a folk or a spokesman. He didn't have a band. He was playing with a rigged up harmonica to his guitar, and he was not writing necessarily I Love You songs.
Was there any movement to drop Dylan at that time from the CBS roster?
Yes, the head of A&R politically did not get along with John Hammond. I was 22 years old and idealistically stood up at an A&R meeting, a producers meeting, and said, we can't drop him. And the head of A&R said, why not? He's not selling any records. I said, because he's such a magnificent songwriter, we could get the first dibs of his songs for other artists that we have on the label.
Albert was Bob's manager and confidant. Albert took care of all the business for Bob. Albert thought he was brilliant. Yeah, and he was. I mean, Albert looked at him as a son, and Bob really respected him. Bob lived in his house for a long time, and he sat in the back bedroom and wrote some great songs. And he let him do what he wanted to do. And what he wanted to do was write songs. We became friends, and we trusted each other. And I think the photographs I've taken of Bob, you could see that. He asked me to drive him to Central City, Colorado, where he worked as a piano player for a stripper once. The interesting thing in Colorado, on the radio, was the first time he heard one of his records played. And we pulled off the road, and he was blown away by that.
When was the first photo shoot you did of Bob or for Bob?
The times they were changing, the album, the cover.
Now on that cover there's a brilliant close-up of Bob, maybe looking a little like something between Woody Guthrie and James Dean.
Could be. It's a good interpretation.
How long did that photo shoot take?
10 minutes. It was done on somebody's patio on the Upper East Side.
Bob, you and Joan Baez have become heroes of the new protest movement. I'd like to get your reaction to the student protest movement and whether you believe that there is a connection between the so-called new left and the so-called new music.
I don't know anything about new left or students very much at all. I don't really know any college students. want you to meet Robbie Robertson here, and Garth Hudson, Mickey Jones, Rick Danko, and Richard. They're all poets.
I was working a club in Detroit, Michigan called Gay Haven. I got this phone call at my room, call back operator 6 to call Albert Grossman. I call back. Mickey, Albert Grossman. I said, well, hi, Al. Who are you? He said, well, I'm Bob Dylan's manager. And he said, yeah, we've been looking all over for you. Bob Dylan wants you to be his drummer. Bob Dylan is going to start a world tour, and he's going to play electric. He wants to put a band together. Those audiences expected a folk music concert. They had no clue that Bob was coming electric. A lot of people said Bob, you know, because he was playing this electric, he had sold out. He did it for the money. But the reality is, Bob probably made less money on that tour than any tour he'd ever done because he wanted to play electric music. So you can't say he did it for the money because it cost him a lot of money to lug this sound equipment around the world. Our sound guy was Richard Alderson to go along with that incredible sound system that we brought. Our road manager was Victor Mamutis. When we got to Sweden, Bob Newirth, Howard Alk, Jones Alk, Don Pennebaker all came to do the document of that tour for a TV special. A lot of people forget that the first concert tour was in Hawaii. Garth Hudson was my roommate and truly one of the great musicians. We're hanging out on the balcony of our hotel, and I thought, man, here I am in Hawaii on the beach. There's Diamond Head. I am styling. I had heard the songs, but some of those songs we did completely different than his early original recordings. They were totally, One Too Many Mornings, a totally different version. So we were learning as we go. Bob, instead of doing fancy fills, which I was not a fancy fill guy to begin with, he wanted 8-note build-ups. We'd be playing well, that's what Bob wanted. And Bob was the one who said, try this, do this for me. I want to keep this really simple. Well, it turns out to be that that's one of the things that people like, and that was Bob.
Some of your critics say that you have no real purpose in mind when you write a song except to shock people. Is that true?
No, you know that's not true. You've heard the songs, haven't you?
Yes.
Well, you know that's not true.
I was just excited. Never been to Australia before, so I was excited about being there. At Rushcutter Bay is where Sydney Stadium was, which was a huge boxing arena. He says, tonight, Bob Dylan. We're on stage here. We're about to do a sound check for the concert that night, and we got booked a second night because we sold the Sydney Stadium out 2 nights in a row. After Sydney, we went to do our concert up in Brisbane. You can see Albert sitting in the back of the car there with Bob. Our sound man, Richard Alderson, recorded every concert that we did on his Nagra machine. We'd go back to the hotel and listen to the concert, kind of critique the thing. And I think it wasn't until listening to some of those recordings in the hotel did I realize we got booed. What was that about? And we all laughed about it, Bob included. We'd have the biggest laughs when we'd hear them boo. The more they booed, the heavier my right foot got, and the more Bob Dylan laughed. It's upsetting when you hear some of that about they paid to hear that folk music and that perfect feel for the folk genre, and then they got something else. Well, you know what? They did get the folk music. They got the entire first half of the concert in folk music. We just gave them a little something extra.
Are you trying to say something when you write, or are you just entertaining?
I'm just an entertainer. That's all.
Well, what are you trying to say in this song? Can you take a couple of songs?
I can't, no, I can't try to tell you that. Obviously, I just can't try to tell you that.
From Brisbane, we went straight down to Melbourne. Melbourne's a unique place. That's the head of the government of Australia. As we go under the train trestles and the underpass, you'll see the concert hall in Melbourne that we performed at. It was called Festival Hall. So I went down in the audience and took my camera and shot a little bit of Bob performing his acoustic set. Bob always opened the show with the acoustic set. As a fan of Bob Dylan's acoustic music, I would be sitting right on the edge of the stage watching and loving every minute of what Bob did acoustically. I thought it was pretty cool that we were doing this live TV show in Melbourne. It was the only live television show that we did on the tour. And they absolutely hung on every word of the acoustic set. While we were doing the electric set, they felt like, well, I've heard this in the film Eat the Document, that Bob was a sellout, that Bob was a traitor, that Bob did it for the money. And the reality is, Bob did it for Bob. I'm not sure that Bob's thought was, I'm going to try to give them what they want to see. I think Bob, as an artist, myself, Robbie, the whole rest of the guys in the group, we came there to play for us. We just let them in on it. When he finished the acoustic set, he'd go back to the dressing room and we'd all kind of hang out and get ready to do our electric set. And it's funny, Bob would come back, he couldn't wait to get that acoustic guitar off his neck. It was like a changed person. He was like a caged animal. Couldn't wait to get out there and plug that black Telecaster in. You know, that geared us up for the concert too. Our equipment was already set. We set that long before the acoustic set. So all we had to do was walk out, sit down, wait for Bob to count it off or Robbie to count it off, and we were gone. We got lost. When we did the electric set, I gave my camera to one of the technicians, and this is live on stage. They had a very fancy backdrop of these sparkly curtains. I'll never forget that. Bob had moments where he tuned into everybody on stage. Obviously, we're playing to the audience, so the majority of the time was there, but we had little moments between each other. That's the way it looked on TV live in '66 in Melbourne. Arriving at the airport or leaving the airport, we always had a group of fans out there wanting just to get a glimpse of Bob. We're leaving Melbourne now to go to Adelaide. There's the famous Victor Bermudez hat. Richard Alderson is in the fur coat there.
Is it true that you have changed your name, and if so, what was your real name?
My real name was Knezevich.
That's the first or the last name?
That was the first name. I don't even want to tell you what the last name was.
I can tell you that in doing interviews, pre-concert interviews, he loved to play games with the interviewers. He very seldom did it as a straight interview. I can remember one point he did it with a puppet.
How many people who labor in the same musical vineyard in which you toil, how many would you say could be characterized as protest singers today?
How many?
Yes. Are there many?
Yeah, well, I think there's about 136.
You say about 136? Yeah. Or do you mean exactly 136?
It's either 136 or 142.
Everybody wanted to say, call him a protest singer. But he never was a protest singer. He just sang about facts. It was your job to make a decision on it.
Do you sing protest songs?
No.
What do you sing?
No, I sing all love songs.
The way we became known as the band, because we were the Hawks when we left on the tour, but because we got booed and we were so hated, the next day the reviews would come out in the paper about the concert, about the fact that his acoustic set was so great, but when he came on with the band, we hated it. We never got referred to as the Hawks in the media. We were always the band. The band should go back to America. The band should, well, So we just became the band. We all hung out with Bob actually quite a bit. Robbie kind of was glued to Bob's shoulder. We all kind of called Robbie Barnacle Man because it was like he was an appendage to Bob's arm. But we were all there. Some of us were on camera more than others. Some of us were off camera more than others. But we were all there. When we'd go back to the hotel after the concerts and listen to these tapes, we were all there. When Robbie and Bob would jam in the hotel room, not every time we were there, they did some of that just by themselves, but many times we were all there. We sort of were all in this together. We are on our way to Stockholm, Sweden. Sweden was a fun place for us. This is where we first see Don Pennebaker in front of the hotel because Pennebaker is there along with Bob Newirth and Howard Alk and Jones Alk because they are now starting to shoot our film, which ended up Eat the Document. Did a concert at a place called the Concerthuset, and wonderful concert hall. We made the trip over to Copenhagen in Denmark. That's a great place. I really liked Denmark a lot. I think one of the highlights of our time in Copenhagen was when we went up to Elsinore, which is Hamlet's castle. And we spent an entire day up there with Bob and the group, and Pennebaker went along with Howard and Jones and Bob Newirth. This is where Pennebaker shot a lot of the footage. There's Don right there with his camera and that famous top hat. We pretty much saw every nook and cranny of Hamlet's castle. And we were basically just walking around shooting kind of touristy stuff that was used in Eat the Document. The whole point was that we wanted to shoot some footage of Bob at this very famous place. Albert Grossman came along, Richard Alderson came along, our sound man for the concert, just to be part of the group. You cannot mistake the Bob Dylan walk. You know that's Bob Dylan's from any distance. It's Bob Dylan, no question. We arrive in London. We stayed at the Mayfair Hotel off Berkeley Square and Piccadilly Circus. I love London. I love England. It's such a great place. We started off in England by flying over to Ireland. We got on a train. We took the train from Dublin up to Northern Ireland and Belfast. And we took that because of all the crowds at the airport. We thought it'd be a little more subdued to be on the train. We'd enjoy the train. I loved riding the train. We did some fun stuff on the train. We were on the coast. See, we had these private compartments on the train, which was pretty cool. Finally made it into Belfast. We got a cab. In fact, there's Richard Alderson, and there's Robbie in our cab on the way to the hotel in Belfast. Great shot of Pennebaker here getting in the cab. You never see him without his hat and his camera. The crowds at the hotels were jammed. The streets were jammed. You could hardly get in and out of the hotel. It's the first of the, quote, rock star, I guess, because even though Bob was this folk singer, right here, he's a rock star. Pretty much we got the same reaction whether we were in an English-speaking country or a foreign-speaking country. Believe me, in foreign countries where they don't speak English, the kids who study English in school, they know every lyric of every Bob Dylan song. But when it came to the electric set, not well received anywhere in the world. Our first inclination should have been Hawaii. But by the time word had gotten around and by the time we got to Great Britain, it was not a pleasant scene in Britain. We got booed big time. The famous tour bus in Great Britain. There's Howard and Joan Zalk right behind Don Pennebaker. That's Pennebaker without his hat. We should love that. And there was Garth and Rick Danko. I did go out front with my camera and shoot a little bit of Bob doing his acoustic set. You got to remember that I was not only Bob's drummer, I was Bob's fan. Many times I would go out with my movie camera and I'd shoot part of this acoustic set, and I would get lost in just watching Bob perform. There's nothing like sitting in the front row and watching Bob Dylan play acoustic folk music. It's unbelievable. So a little bit of the electric set. I gave the camera off to someone else to go shoot a little bit of footage for me. We kicked that thing off with Tell Me Mama. And there was a little unrest in the theater even before we started the tune, because everyone is checking their tuning and we're kind of getting ready to get into this mode of the electric set. Bob would get that Telecaster on, man. It was so cool just to watch him walk on stage. They weren't sure exactly what they were going to see. They didn't really know what to expect. We counted this thing off. We got a little bit of feel going first. Then came the countdown. And boy, I'll tell you what, when I slammed that snare drum to kick off Tell Me Mama, the place went crazy. We all made our contact and we had our moment with Bob in the middle of the show. The one that comes to mind for me is when Bob would go to the piano, he'd put the Telecaster down, sit down at the piano for Ballad of a Thin Man. And Bob would look up at me and he would, with this little look, he'd say, "No offense, Mickey." And I'd look back and I'd go, "None taken, Bob."
Let's talk about the Manchester Free Trade Hall concert, which, of all the nights on the tour, that's even thought of as not only the tour that changed the face of rock and roll, but maybe the moment that changed the face of rock and roll.
The Manchester Free Trade Hall was the concert that stood out of the tour because of one thing, the Judas shout. When the crowd was stomping and doing this in unison stomp and clap to show their distaste for the electric music. As the clapping and foot stomping came down, from the balcony we heard, "Judas!" And Bob Dylan looked around and he walked to the mic and he said, "I don't believe you. I don't believe you. You're a liar. You're a liar." Well, the place went crazy. At that moment, when we counted off like a Rolling Stone, I did a flam on my snare drum harder than I've ever done it in my whole life. We heard someone say, "Play effing loud." And a lot of people think it was me. It wasn't me. A lot of people think it was Bob, that Bob turned back and said, "Play effing loud." I don't believe it was Bob. I don't remember Bob turning back. The kickoff, the foot stomp to kick off like a Rolling Stone was Robbie. Bob was still facing the audience. Had it been Bob, it would have been real loud on the mic. I believe that it was one of the stage crew because I detect a bit of a British accent. I've listened to it a number of times, and it wasn't me, and I don't believe it was Bob. I think it was one of the guys on the stage crew enjoying the moment. The Judas shout was sort of the culmination and I guess the icing on the cake of the negative feelings about the electric tour. Funny that this many years later, as I said, people say we didn't get it, and now we get it, and we considered it the greatest rock and roll tour in history. We knew we were making good music. There was no question about that. We knew we were making good music, and when people asked me about it, I said, you know what? They just don't get it. And now they get it. from Scotland, we took a little side trip from Great Britain over to Paris to play the Olympia Theater with Bob Dylan. Unique thing happened on stage at the Olympia Theater in Paris. Bob found a huge American flag and put that flag up on the backdrop behind us. And it's the only concert where we used the American flag. The French are not real thrilled with Americans. So Bob put the flag up basically to say to the French, "In your face." And that's what it was all about. About 2-3 days before I was to get on the plane to go back to New York for rehearsals for the new show, the tour in Russia, we were going to do Shea Stadium, and then we were going from Shea Stadium to Moscow. Shea Stadium was going to be opening act Peter, Paul, and Mary, and then we were going to close with the Electric set. And a couple days before I was to go back to New York to start rehearsing, I get a call from Bob, and it is Bob. It's not Albert. It's Bob who calls me. And he said, "It's Bob." I said, "Hey, man, how you doing? What's going on? Where you at?" He said, "I'm in the hospital." I said, "What?" And he had been riding his motorcycle in the woods up in Woodstock, and apparently he hit a log. Instead of the motorcycle jumping the log, it nosed into the log, flew Bob head first over the handlebars, and he came down on his head and broke his neck.
I don't know if I believe there was a motorcycle accident. You know, maybe he fell off the fucking bike.
But he was laid up, I think, about 10 months.
To me, a motorcycle accident is something serious.
I heard somebody say it was just a spill in the driveway.
A while after that, I saw the bike, and the bike wasn't twinged up.
He said, "There's no need for you to come to New York on Thursday because we're canceling the Shea Stadium and Russia, so we're not going to be rehearsing, and I don't know how long I'm going to be laid up."
I don't think he broke his neck.
He told me he cracked 2 vertebrae. He saw his whole life pass in front of him, and I think he saw shit.
I think he just went to get rejuvenated. I think it was the tours and the times, they were very difficult on him.
A personal question here, and I hope you'll forgive it, but you sound and you look very tired. Are you ill, or is this your normal state, your normal condition? Now, don't be offended.
Well,
you do look and sound tired.
I'm, you know, I don't like to hear that kind of thing.
I don't mean to offend you, but you do. We can hardly hear you, and you look weary.
Well, I'm from New York City. You're all from California. You know, this health thing, I don't know. I feel quite embarrassed about it the same way you do, probably. But I don't, you know, I have no explanation for it.
I mean, he got to a point where there was a lot expected from him, and I think he had driven himself into the ground, and it was time for him to clean up. I think months before the tour, they ran full-page ads in every newspaper, and it sold out immediately. And there was millions and millions of dollars able to be put away until the tour started, when they decided who gets a refund, because there weren't that many seats. So it was a very shrewd, interesting way of promoting a concert. And then I got a phone call from Bob saying that he'd like me to do the tour. I said, "Yeah, man, let's do it." And they paid me very well. I went out on the tour, and it was wonderful. We opened in Chicago. That was the opening concert in Chicago. And when he just came out on the stage, I just felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He was great. He gave me a lot of happy moments with his music and his performances. We had our own 707 jet, and there was only 11 of us on it. It was the band and Bob and myself, Barry Feinstein, and Rob Triboni, that we had this whole jet to ourselves, with bedrooms and bars, food, you name it, and it was on the plane. You would just show up at a certain place at the airport, and there the plane was. As you got off on, Barry Feinstein would hand you an envelope, and the envelope would tell you what room you're in. Everybody had a fictitious name. You know, you knew who everybody was by their new names. And when you get off the plane, somebody would come to the plane and hand you another envelope, and that was the keys for the hotel room. And you would just get into the limousine and go to the hotel. There was no checking in, there was no checking out. There was no nothing. It was just sheer delight. It was the greatest tour I was ever on. It was the first time I ever saw kids hold up, you know, their hands with matches and lighters, and I took that picture. And that was the cover of the audience holding lit matches, lighters. And it was exciting.
And was that a spontaneous thing that occurred?
Yeah, it just happened.
What do you think it meant? What did it mean to Bob?
I think it meant a lot to him. I was backstage photographing, and I told him I would wish he would smile sometimes so I could get a picture of him, kind of lighthearted. And he turned around, and there I was, and there he was, and he gave me this great smile. Thank you, Bob. This is my favorite Bob Dylan in concert, on stage photograph. This is a picture of Jimmy Carter, then the governor of the state of Georgia, came to the concert, invited us back to the governor's mansion for a breakfast. And we went up into one of the rooms, and I took this picture of Bob and Jimmy Carter. They both liked each other, and it was a wonderful picture. We stopped in Washington. We played Washington. Phillips Collection, the gallery in Washington, D.C. He was always taken with paintings. Bob had such a good time in the galleries. He loved art, he loved sculpture, and I loved taking pictures of him there. Said after this tour, I'll never go on another fucking tour again because it'll never be that great. When they did the next tour, which was the Rolling Thunder tour, I would go on it because it could never be as good as that Signature tour. That was the cream of the crop.
Describe the circumstance of when you first met Bob Dylan.
I was walking down the east side on 13th Street. This was purely a fateful event. I had my violin in my hand, and I was going to cross the street within probably seconds and go into a basement apartment to do a rehearsal. And within those few seconds, his car cut me off. He said, "Hey, can you play that thing?" He insisted on hearing me play. So I agreed, and we went to his studio on the east side. It was like a loft, really. Not a recording studio, just upright piano and acoustic guitar in the room. And that's when he started to play all the songs of what would be on Desire. I used just little bits of Mozambique, little bits of One More Cup of Coffee. Eventually moved over to the piano, and a small smile came to his face at some point.
In the summer of '75, he came down to the bitter end. Ramblin' Jack needed a band, and so we backed him up. My band, Rockin' Rob and the Rebels, which consisted of Howie Wyeth, myself, and Ken Pine. And I think Dylan was down there to hear Ramblin' Jack, and in the course of things, he also heard me. I got a phone call from his producer, Don DeVito, at Columbia Records, asked me to come down and listen to what was going on with Bob's recording, which was the material for Desire. It wasn't an invitation to play or anything. He just wanted to sound me out on some things. Apparently Bob had asked him to have me show up. I came upon a scene of great confusion. They had no idea how they were going to record these tunes. There was a large party atmosphere with Eric Clapton, Dave Mason, the English group Kokomo, and all of their various hangers-on.
It was really wonderful to be in the mix of all that, but I didn't know how it was all going to relate to the final album.
I mean, everybody when he wants to watch a Bob Dylan recording session, the musicians seem to be taking the approach of let's do take after take until we get it right and rehearsing it, the standard way that people work. But that's not the way Bob works, and I knew from my experience having listened to Bob that it seemed that spontaneity is the way that you capture Bob's music. So DeVito took me aside and asked me what was going on, as did Bob Dylan, and I expressed my opinion that I didn't think that this was happening because there were too many people and it was too disorganized. They asked me, what would I do in this situation? And I told them I would come back the next night without all these people, send everybody home, and just come back with a smaller group. Well, what smaller group would you suggest? I said, well, you know that group you heard me play with last week at the bitter end? Did you like them? Yeah, sure, they liked them. So I said, we'll just have my band come and back you up, and it'll sound great. And so they took me on my offer, and the next night I showed up with just Howie Wyeth and Scarlett Rivera, who was the only one of the people from the previous nights who I suggested that they keep, because she had a really nice sound.
Lo and behold, I went into the studio the following day, and it was just Howie Wyeth, Rob Stoner, and myself.
We recorded almost the entire album that very night. The night that we did Sarah, which I believe is the second night of recording, Bob introduced me to her and said, this is Sarah, and we're going to do a song for her tonight. She was standing in the booth, I remember, as we were in the studio recording that tune that night.
I think she could not help but be moved by that song. I think she was deeply moved by it.
And was Bob doing his vocals at the same time, or would that be an overdub?
Nah, he never overdubbed. He would play and sing at the same time.
There was no overdubs.
That was it?
That was it. If you made a mistake or something, it's like, okay, that stays, you know?
You had to get it all right that way because his vocal is bleeding into the guitar mic and vice versa. So just like people used to record before they had separation.
How would you describe Dylan's recording style in the studio?
Very intuitive. I mean, he was not dictating what you were going to play and how you were going to play it. I was allowed to create my own parts and create, you know, the dynamics with the words and the vocals and the energy that would sort of characterize it. And he allowed me all that freedom.
I could not fathom in my wildest imagination that anybody would think for 1 second that Ruben Hurricane Carter would go in and shoot or kill or hurt anybody that did not bother him. My style was straight ahead. I come to fight. I didn't come to dance. I didn't come to play with the audience. I come to fight. And everybody who ever fought me realized that whenever you get in the ring with Ruben Hurricane Carter, you better fight 3 minutes of every round, because I'm trying to get you out of there every single second.
So did this ferocious style bring on the nickname Hurricane?
It described the legitimate destructive forces that was raging within my soul because of the hatred, the institutionalized hatred that existed in this country, you know, with African people in this country. I grew up with Martin Luther King. Martin was 10 years older than I was. But I grew up with Malcolm X too. Malcolm was one of my best friends. There was going to be a march on Selma, Alabama. And Dr. Martin Luther King asked me if I would join them. He said, well, Ruben, you know, we're nonviolent. I said, well, I'm nonviolent too, as long as people remain nonviolent with me. But if you don't remain nonviolent with me, I'm not going to remain nonviolent with you.
Why did you think the cops looked at this as a racial motivation? I think there was a murder of a black man.
That's what they tied together. There was a bar a mile or so away from the Lafayette Bar and Grill. The white man sold the bar to this black man because the bar was not making any business. But when the black man owned the business, then black people began to patronize the business, and the business became very lucrative. And now the white man wanted his bar back. And so the white man shotgunned this person. That was the night before.
So the police put together a scenario of a retaliation crime.
Exactly. There was a clear and unmistakable unmistakable black against white attitude during that time. Clearly. I mean, white folks was for white folks and black folks was for black folks, and the twain did not seem to meet. What they said was that John Artis and I went into this bar and killed 4 people who we never seen or never knew or anything. And when they said that prize fighter, that mean, ugly guy who was considered to be a killer in the ring, was now considered to be a killer in the streets. When I wrote the 16th round, I then sent that book to my peers. I sent the book to Bob Dylan. And when he was coming back to California from England, he stopped at Trenton State Prison to visit me. Everyone else who ever come to see me, the first thing they want to know was, Ruben, are you guilty or are you innocent? Bob Dylan didn't care about that. He didn't want to know that. He looked at me and said, who are you, man? What are you? Are you what I am seeing? Just as I was asking myself, Dylan, are you what I'm seeing? Dylan and I hit it off quite quickly and quite well. I mean, we were both entertainers. He being a troubadour, me being a prize fighter. We both had family tragedies. His family was escaping from the Russian Tsar. My family was escaping from segregation. We thought that we had an obligation to speak out for our people. That's what Dylan was doing, and that's what I was doing. And so we talked the first day, 8, 9, 10 hours. We talked about some of everything. And I thought that was the end of it. I didn't know Bob Dylan was going to write a song. He didn't know he was going to write a song. A week later, he came back. He had a demo. And the demo was The Hurricane. And I listened to it, and I said, wow, listen to what this genius has put together. He took 6 weeks of trial and a whole many, many years and put it in that song. You know, the song wasn't the regular length of a recording, which is 2 minutes and something. This took 8 minutes and 30-some odd seconds, you know. But it was a powerful piece of writing.
I got this phone call from Bob's office telling me that we were going to go to Chicago and do a gig. We were going to go do a TV show. He wanted the same group that had been in the studio. It was a tribute to John Hammond, featuring many of the artists who John Hammond had worked with over the years.
Plus co-host Jerry Wexler, and of course, John Hammond.
As it got closer, I really was getting terrified. Howie Wyeth was the guy that helped me calm down. He was so sweet and extremely laid back.
Okay.
You know, and he said, oh, piece of cake. Don't worry about the people in front of you. Just tune into us. That's it.
At the TV show, we did 2 songs which I had played with him before, namely 2 songs from the Desire album that we just recently recorded, Oh Sister and Hurricane, and we did a song which I'd never played with him, which was Simple Twist of Fate.
Was that the first time he sang Hurricane live?
I believe it was. It was incredible. I really feel the energy was driven a lot by the violin. The words really brought out a lot of energy from me, too.
Norman, who was very powerful influence, I think, on Bob. And Norman loved this film, Les Enfants du Paradis, and he showed Bob the film. And there's a character in that film who's in whiteface. He's the mime. He was played by Jean-Louis Barrault, great French mime. It's a very romantic film. It's a very dark film. It was made actually during the time that Paris was occupied by the Nazis. And what the film is about a traveling band of actors, real theater, street theater, mime, and the children of paradise are the ones that sit way, way up below the eaves.
Bob had told me that he had this idea for a traveling musical carnival, and him being just one of the acts. It was the next step he wanted to make after the big stadium tour of '74. He wanted to do something that was a little wilder and more off the cuff.
I was playing at the bitter end in the spring of '75, and we had a wonderful night in there. Bob was there, and I think Dave Van Rock and Bobby Newworth. He said, we've got an idea. We've been thinking about doing a tour with a bus. Maybe you and me and Joan Baez and Bob Newworth. And we'll play little venues, small halls. Could you dig it? And I said, count me in, Bob. I'll drink to that. Click. And that's how it all began.
When I showed up at Studio Instrument Rentals, SIR on 52nd Street, first rehearsals of what was to become the Rolling Thunder Revue, there was something like 8 or 10 acts.
There were a lot of guitar players.
This was once again a very confused scene. Somebody had to step in and say, you play here, you play here. I only took over as the band leader because nobody else was doing it, so I ended up doing it by default because I figured if somebody didn't organize this thing, it was just going to fall apart into a chaotic mess.
Tell me about the tour.
It was very exciting from the first. Left New York. I remember the bus driver let me drive the bus, and it was Frank Zappa's bus that he'd loaned to us. Bus called Fido, P-H-Y-D-E-A-U-X, Fido. Had a cartoon of a dog running with long flappy ears. I drove Fido for a couple hours going up through New England. Our first place to go was at the base of Cape Cod at an undisclosed location. We didn't know where we were. We had an idea we were somewhere near Cape Cod. We could tell that by the ocean and so forth. We were at a hotel. The hotel was pretty deserted except for a group of elderly women who were having a Mahjong festival there. It was just them and us. And they didn't know who Bob Dylan was. We did do an informal private concert for these women as a kind of a practice thing.
We'd come into a town and they would announce the tickets going on sale the same day through some small venue like college radio station or something, and the thing would be sold out in a few minutes. It was very exciting. Bob would do about 15 or 20 minutes at the end of each half of the show. There was 2 halves of the show with an intermission. It was about a 4-hour show. After that, then we brought out Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Joan Baez and Roger McGuinn, and Joni Mitchell was along for part of it, and various guests.
I was on early in the program. First there was this band called Guam with Bobby Newworth and Mick Ronson, T-Bone Burnett, and the fiddle player, Scarlett Rivera. And after they played about a half-an-hour set, they did about 6 or 7 songs, then they'd bring me on, and I'd play my brief set, which was less than a half an hour, I think. And then I'd come off, and Bob would come rushing on, and he'd hit me on the elbow and say, "Good set, Jack." And that was kind of a routine thing. "Good set, Jack," and he'd hit me on the elbow and run on.
And Scarlett Rivera. Scarlett was this great mystery, this kind of gypsy-looking, fabulous creature, and playing this kind of gypsy-type violin. It was hard to take your eyes off her. She could hold her own there with Bob. It was a kind of a lovely counterpoint to see the two of them on the stage and this kind of drama. She'd do one more cup of coffee, and the two of them would be looking at each other, and you get chills.
I was very cued in to him. I stood at his side, was able to, of course, look at the band as well.
Why was Dylan and others wearing face makeup during the tour?
At one point, somebody in the audience said, "Why are you wearing that?" He said, "Because I want you to hear my words, not look at my face."
I mean, he had a regular running order, but he would change with the way he was singing something. He likes to sing a song the way he wants to sing a song now.
It was very iffy. I mean, there were so many variables. I would have a meeting with Bob, and if Bob wanted to do something different, I would have to have a meeting with the band and convey it to them, and I'd tell them all just to watch me for cues, and we'd handle whatever came up.
Felt like it was a circus, like being on the circus.
It was a large entourage as time went on. For me, being the only female in the band, I sometimes was a target of a little bit of envy and the girlfriends, and that I did not really like. In one show, it was in Toronto actually, many people filtering in and out of the dressing room that I did not know. And lo and behold, evidently somebody had spiked my drink with a drug.
A drug, oh
Yeah,
boy.
yeah. And this is a big show. I mean, we're 5,000 seat hall. And this drug did not come on immediately. It came out actually quite slowly. So the show had already started when it hit. It was a hallucinogenic drug. And I was absolutely mortified that I wouldn't be able to get on stage. I asked 2 security guards to take me by both hands and arms. And when I walked on that stage, I was totally out of my mind. I was horrified, but I was not going to let him down. You know, just used my will to the greatest degree possible to force myself back into the song, into the moment, and to, you know, finish that song. That was one consequence of the entourage that I found pretty unsavory.
What was the interaction and relationship like between Dylan and Joan Baez as the tour went on?
They seemed to have a genuine affection for each other.
When Bob came out, he would come out in the second part of the show, and he would be in whiteface. And Joan Baez came out, also in whiteface. And the light would be just on the 2 of them, singing together as a duet. And they both wore the same clothing and the same hat. And then you realized who was who.
He was electric during those tours. When he sang Along the Watchtower, it was just riveting. It was such a powerful and magical experience, and I knew he was happy with the result. Outrageous reviews worldwide. The tour was an enormous, you know, sensation, really.
They shot this movie, and Bob decided to include me in the movie.
Bob was looking not only to do a documentary of the concert work, but also to do some dramatic footage. And so on our days off, we would do these little quasi-improvised dramatic scenes, some of which were scripted by Sam Shepard, the famous playwright, who was along on the tour with us specifically for that purpose, to write dialogue for these scenes, which were relevant to the story that Bob seemed to be weaving in and out of the concert footage. Everybody had a role, and they could think about what their character was going to do. My role was, I was supposedly playing Gene Vincent, the 50s rocker. Newirth played the masked tortilla, a sort of Mexican wrestler type guy. Renaldo and Clara, apparently, were a fictitious dance team. It involved Bob's relationship with women, as far as I could tell. It was hard to tell at the time, of course, because he was kind of cagey about what was going on.
Why were all the women in the movie playing the role of prostitutes?
Oh boy, it's a loaded question. I don't know, some cryptic statement from Bob, yet another one.
Maybe it's a reflection of a little bit of Judas Priest, right? Okay. Little aspect of that coming out on camera.
Did you ever play the role of a prostitute?
I don't think that was what I was. I don't recall that.
What was your role in the film?
Well, I really don't know what my role is.
I went to the screening. It was at Columbia Pictures, and I loved it. I was very honored to be invited there, and there was just about 5 or 6 people in the audience. It was 5 hours long.
Could you sit through the whole thing?
Oh yeah, I could watch it again.
I was completely shocked with the reviews. I mean, the reviews were quite bad. And I found that shocking because all the critics wanted, more than anything, back of the dressing room scene.
Dylan, from his own volition, he wanted to do a concert in the prison where I was. Johnny Cash was really the only person at that time who were going into Folsom prisons and San Quentin and other prisons to do his song, A Man Named Sue. You know? So the day before the concert in Madison Square Garden, Bob Dylan, Joni Baez, Roberta Flack, Allen Ginsberg came to Clinton State Prison for Women, where I had been transferred from Trenton State Prison to a prison full of women. You know, because I had so much publicity, so much light was shining on me that they had to get me out of Trenton State Prison, which is the hellhole of the state of New Jersey. And the fact that I was in Clinton, there were no bars. You know, and he wanted to take a picture of me and Dylan on opposite side of the bars. That, where's the bars? They're supposed to be in prison. Where's the bars? And then he saw a gate that was on top. And he said, does that come down? He said, yeah. He said, bring it down. So they brought the gate down, and Dylan was on one side of the gate, and I was on the other side of the gate. The people who lived outside of the fence, they were breaking into the prison. They were climbing the fences to get into the prison because they wanted to see Bob Dylan. So you had people breaking into the prison rather than breaking out of the prison.
A lot of press. It was on all of the evening news shows.
I love it. I think it's a fantastic piece of work being done by Bob Dylan. I think the man is a genius. But even in his genius, even in his wisdom, he couldn't put all these facts together within the 2 or 3 minutes. It took him 8 minutes to put them together.
It's been an incredible tour. A lot of that's due to Bob Dylan, who was really sweet.
The audience was the inmates at the institution. They weren't Dylan fans or Baez fans or Joni Mitchell fans or anything. It just seemed to be an afternoon's diversion for them.
They didn't act like they were real thrilled to see us or to have any entertainment from white people, because most of the inmates in that prison were black.
It was quite an awesome, kind of frightening experience, really. Just could feel the aggression in the room.
I was one of the few people that they seemed like they were smiling and tapping their foot, because I did spend a little time hanging out with some Southern people and some black folks. I remember one time getting picked up by some black folks in the South, and I hitchhiking back from Florida, and they stopped in at a bar. I was the only white boy around, and I had my guitar. They liked the cowboy hat, they liked the guitar. And we came in and the jukebox was playing, and I remember the fellow that drove the car said to the bartender, "Pull the plug out the piccolo, we got some live music." So I felt at ease there, and I kind of felt that I was not going to have any problem. I could relate to what they were feeling.
Everybody got into it, you know, and that's what hurt Joni Mitchell, because everybody was into everybody else. They were into Roberta Flack, they were into everybody else, except Joni Mitchell.
I got the definite impression that they didn't like Joni Mitchell. Her music style was totally lost upon them, because she was like whitewashing it with that Canadian. She didn't have an ounce of color or rhythm or blues, not to their ear.
Right. Because Joni Mitchell was booed on the stage, Joni Mitchell felt as though I could have stopped that, you know, which is absolutely false. And in fact, Joni Mitchell came up to me, you know, after that and said, "Ruben, you're a jive-ass nigga."
Really?
That's what she said. She said, "You're a jive-ass nigga."
What'd you say back to her?
I told her, I said, "You don't know what you're into. You thought I had control of these people. I have no control of these people. I don't want to control these people. You should have controlled them with your voice. It was your problem that they booed you, not mine. I had nothing to do. I was sitting in the audience. You're the one performing up there."
The other inmates, were they supportive of you, or did you feel there was any jealousy over all the attention and help you were getting with your case?
I never had any problems with prisoners. Prisoners understood where I was coming from. They understood that I felt as though a crime was committed against me.
The tour culminated in a show at Madison Square Garden deemed the Night of the Hurricane.
The Night of the Hurricane.
Bob Dylan was there with the entire Rolling Thunder Review, as was Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
And I understand you listened to the concert on the phone.
On the telephone, yes. I thank the crowd for having been, you know, for being there.
Well, it was great to be playing my hometown, New York City, and to be playing the Garden especially. And I remember it being a very festive occasion with a lot of guest stars, because we would pick up different guest artists at various towns along the way. And of course, New York has more great local people than anybody else. So we had Roberta Flack that night, Richie Havens.
Powerful performance that night.
It was more driven by the feeling of the emblematic song of the tour, which was Hurricane.
From the Madison Square Garden concert, Dylan donated $125,000.
The tour stopped in Houston at the Astrodome for a second night of the hurricane in a stadium.
Well, it's kind of a shocking place to perform in. It's just like massive football field size.
I saw the reason for that being that they wanted to raise as much money as possible because it was a fundraiser.
At that concert, there was Isaac Hayes, Stevie Wonder, and Dylan and others, and the concert went great. The mayor of Houston, Texas, presented my wife and daughter with the American flag, you know, in support of my claim of innocence.
I got a chance to meet Willie Nelson that day. His security guards, which were mostly ex-cons, were chasing me around backstage, you know, just sort of. I found myself kind of hiding in various rooms, and he found out about it later and sent me 24 yellow roses the next day.
Were they from Willie or from the security guards?
No, from Willie,
Okay.
yeah.
After that concert, that's when the New Jersey State Supreme Court handed their decision down that overturned the conviction. That is what I was working for, to get the courts to overturn this conviction so I can have a new trial where all the facts could come out.
I was quite surprised when he called me up to organize what became this costumed extravaganza.
Why would that be surprising to you?
Because Bob is so mercurial. One never knows what he's going to do. When we did the last gig at Fort Collins, he hadn't said anything about continuing on, so I just assumed that was it. And in the music business, as you know, you just got to take everything one day at a time at face value. Bob had rented an old warehouse that actually had been a gun factory, which became known as Rundown Studios in Santa Monica. It was just a raw industrial space. When we first got there, we just set up and rehearsed, and we didn't even hear from Bob for like a week or two. So we just rehearsed his tunes without him there.
At what point did Dylan tell you what kind of group he was trying to put together?
Bob showed me a telegram that he got from the promoter who we'd be working for initially. And this was a Japanese promoter, which insisted that he play his greatest hits and not do what he had become known for doing on the previous couple of Rolling Thunder tours of doing only his recent material. And the guy listed out exactly what tunes he wanted. Blowing in the Wind, Times They Are Changing. He wanted the older stuff. And so we worked up arrangements of those things. We would just try and make the tunes sound as unrecognizable as possible. Bob wasn't around for a whole lot of that. He would just leave it to us to come up with stuff. I would do the singing at the rehearsals. Bob would come by at night after rehearsals, and he and I would listen to the tapes. He would express his approval and disapproval of various arrangements that I was making. It's better to keep him enthused and fresh than have him slog through, you know, version after version of these songs, which he didn't particularly want to do in the first place. When the thing eventually was sounding so good that it appeared to be roadworthy, he got very, very happy about it, and he offered to buy me a car as a reward. He was going to do an Elvis.
What kind of car did he get you?
Nothing came of it, but the sentiment was appreciated. He wanted to showcase his music in a larger setting, in a big band setting. And so we got a saxophone player, Steve Douglas, who used to play with Duane Eddy and played on all the Phil Spector stuff. We got a pretty large ensemble together for him, which of course opened up arranging possibilities which weren't possible with this, you know, pretty much guitar-oriented Rolling Thunder stuff. And also we had the luxury of this long rehearsal time at the Rundown Studios, so we would just evolve these interesting arrangements. I believe some of the tapes of those rehearsals have survived as really good documents of that band. In fact, they're better than what was officially released by CBS.
He was performing. It was really showmanship, and the band was sumptuous. My pal Steve Douglas was the sax player in the band. He said they had about 90 songs in the book, that Dylan was compulsively teaching them new songs at every sound check.
How did the size of the band restrict or help Dylan be Dylan?
Well, I think he became a new Dylan. I think he became more of an entertainer Dylan. In fact, the program from the initial leg of that tour, the Japanese, Australian, New Zealand, Asian tour, lists Bob as the entertainer. You play as slick as you look. Now, Rolling Thunder had a casual look and a casual sound. The big band was very mannered and orderly, as was the look. And the uniforms, I thought, had a very nice look.
The old songs were getting these Las Vegas kind of Neil Diamond style arrangements. Blowing in the Wind was done up like a Wayne Newton number.
I sort of gleaned that it was because of the influence of his new manager, Jerry Weintraub. Jerry Weintraub at the time was managing John Denver, Frank Sinatra. He was promoting some Presley shows. Neil Diamond he worked with. I believe that Jerry Weintraub had caught Bob's ear and said, look, if you want to make Sinatra, Presley, Diamond money, this is the kind of act you gotta have. And you can't do this ragtag blue jeans Rolling Thunder business. You gotta have a slick showbiz act that you can come out and do night after night.
It was very Neil Diamond-like. Neil Diamond was the biggest thing in the business at that time. And I think Dylan took a look at this guy and identified with Neil, you know, another Jewish guy trying to make it as a songwriter, can't sing all that well, has to like sort of scoot through the lyrics, and you know, I can do that.
And I know Bob had never been to Japan before. We thought we were stiffing in front of this crowd. But the deal is with Japanese audiences is they're very quiet and attentive, and they don't react a whole lot because they're so enraptured by the performance. They just do their polite little applause and next. The big band, although it was a different sound for him, he had to do like an entire 2 hours by himself. So it was a lot more taxing on him. And also, I don't think he enjoyed the lack of spontaneity as much. It became a grind, I got the impression. The worst problem that I had with the big band was that this lady, Helena Springs, was always messing up her parts. And the other girls and the other musicians would always be on my case to tell her to, you know, don't, this harmony is wrong, and this part she's singing is stepping on my toes. And unfortunately, Bob was very personally fond of this girl, and this created a lot of bad feeling about my being the guy who was always on Helena's case, yet it was kind of Bob's girlfriend at the time. So that wasn't too cool, and I'm sure that was one of the reasons that Bob decided that I should look for employment elsewhere.
You know about the spirit of the Antichrist? Does anybody here know about that? There is only one gospel. The Bible says anybody who preaches anything other than that one gospel, let him be accursed. Rock and roll! If you want to rock and roll, you can go down and rock and roll. You can go see Kiss, and you rock and roll all your way down to the pit. No matter how much money you got, there's only two kinds of people. There's saved people and there's lost people. Sometime down the line, you remember you heard it here, that Jesus is Lord.
A lot of people who are searching. So a lot of baby boomers had come through the 60s. They were not very happy with the way things went, the Vietnam War. Many of them were disillusioned. There was almost a sense of an apocalypse, that something was coming, something needed to change. And so the message of Jesus, I think, really impacted people. It brought out this is what is missing in your life. And so we saw literally thousands of people decide to open their hearts to the Lord and invite Him to take over their lives and lead them on.
It was more of a Pentecostal movement. I mean, there was a lot of singing that went on. The music, you didn't even have to hear preaching because the music was so incredibly beautiful. It just had a kind of mystical quality about it. You know, being a rock and roller is not an easy life, and you don't have much stability going on when you're a rock and roller. So they felt that stability that came through Christ.
It was like a revelatory kind of interpretation of Christianity where it was all very individualized. Develop a close relationship with Jesus as the Savior of mankind. They've all been like visited by Jesus. It was not Christianity, it was Jesus.
The fact of the matter is that most people come to the Lord at a point of crisis in their life.
I think the deeper the pain, the better the witness you become.
Jesus said he came not to heal the healthy, but he came for the sick. Well, that's why he came. He came for people who need help. That's how I came to the Lord. That's how everybody in the vineyard came to the Lord. Quite honestly, I think that's how Bob came to the Lord. He had a need in his life. The Lord was the answer. He called our office because of some things that were going on, and when he called, we had some pastors who had musical backgrounds, and they went up and talked to him, and that's how that came about. It was very down to earth. It was like, do you need help in your life? Do you want to see a change in your life? You have a sense there's something more. Are you aware that your sins, your own failures have created a lot of guilt and shame in your life, and you want to get free of that? It wasn't like, we're going up there to convert Bob or something. You know, he called them, he said, you want to talk to somebody? And they went up and just talked with him. It was very personal, very relational. It was the way it's supposed to happen.
Were you surprised to hear that he had ended up in the arms of the Lord?
Not really. I wasn't surprised because he's a true seeker. I think that characterizes his music as much as the political all along. It's spiritual and political and powerful and transformational.
The Vineyard Christian Fellowship weren't hustlers trying to, make a buck and stuff, or Jimmy Swagger types.
Our concern was that Bob would be co-opted or drawn off by somebody who had their own agenda for Bob. Bob, too, is a very sophisticated person. He's no dummy. You know, some artists are kind of out there, but they're kind of spacey, and we trusted that God would work in his life.
In the vineyard, could someone accept Jesus and still be Jewish?
Absolutely. This is very hard because of what's happened in church history. Jewish people have actually been persecuted by Christians. I have a neighbor who went through the Holocaust. You know, his Christian neighbors in Austria, one day they were friendly and the next day they were, turning him in. For a Jewish person, when they come to know God through the Lord, Jesus, something opens up for them. There have been times when 20 to 30% of our congregation has been Jewish. They don't feel like they've left their Judaism behind or their Jewishness behind. In early Christianity, Christianity was Jewish. All the apostles were Jewish. All the disciples, hundreds and hundreds of disciples that followed Jesus, they were all Jewish. Jesus was Jewish.
How could Dylan, or how could one, be Jewish and accept Christianity simultaneously?
It's the Gentile that needs to convert, not the Jewish person. In the early days, Gentiles were pagans. And so the conversion to the God of Israel is what really happened for Gentiles who became believers in the Jewish Messiah, Jesus.
The whole messianic belief is all Jewish. The only difference is that Jews are expecting Messiah to come. Christians call that the second coming.
I would say that Gentiles who believe in Jesus become kosher more than Jews become Gentiles when they accept Jesus.
What exactly is a born-again experience?
What that means is Jesus lived here. Jesus was with his disciples. He said, when I go, I will send my Spirit to be with you and to be in you. And so that's really what being born again is. It's not a theoretical kind of thing. It's an actual experience.
Bob Dylan has given stories about that, saying that he's felt the manifestation of God right in the room.
When you've had that experience, believe me, you know it, and you walk in it. It changes everything about you, from the way you view the world to the way you think, how you treat other people.
From Dylan's perspective, he had a biblical born-again experience, which changed him from the inside out.
All of our ministry at the Vineyard was based on Bible study. We would teach every book in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. So we would study the book of Exodus. Now we might study the book of Exodus and the children of Israel coming out of out of slavery, the application would be, you know, you used to be in slavery to sin. You've come out of Egypt, just like the Israelites have, except in a spiritual sense. And you're going to the promised land. You know, you have a place that God has for you, a mission that God has for you, a plan that God has for you. Bob is not a typical person. I mean, he's Bob Dylan, okay? You know, in my class, he'd come to class, but he was still Bob Dylan, you know? He dressed like Bob Dylan. I always thought, Bob, if you don't want to look like Bob, why do you look like Bob if you want to be anonymous? Take off the glasses and the leather jacket and the beret for a minute, you know? But I gave him an A in my class, no. He just would come to class and did all the assignments.
It's interesting that Dylan said, which is very honest on his part, he said when he struggled more, he felt his lyrics were better than they are now. Struggle makes your words better when you were first and then last and you got to come back.
After John Wesley Harding and Nashville Skyline, you could feel each record, this guy was further and further away from whatever source of inspiration, whatever crucible had forged those songs that he'd written so many of. If Dogs Run Free, okay.
So was Dylan's accepting of Jesus more connected to creative well-being or personal salvation?
I think in the beginning it's always personal salvation. It was a whole new world to him. Something turns you in your life and it's a new revelation. You think, God, I never thought about writing about it. Now he has a world of books to look at, from Isaiah to Job. I mean, it just goes on, and every one of those stories is a great story.
I mean, did Irving Berlin suffer because his life had moved in different directions? Or did he just keep cranking out pop songs? And is that the difference between the pop songwriter and the rock songwriter, who is using his own life as material, his own experiences as the metal, the content of that he's fashioning?
When Dylan contacted you and asked you to produce his next album, what was your reaction?
My reaction was like, how high do I jump? Where do you want me to land? Yes, sir, salute. Thank you. What an honor, you know. I had no idea what the content was going to be, that it was going to be wall-to-wall Jesus. Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. And Barry Beckett and I, my co-producer, went out there, went over the material, and sure enough, song after song, it turns out to be the work of the Lord.
Wexler just thought it was nuts and said so to him. You know, what are you having me do this for? I'm just an old Jew. I don't know anything about this stuff. No, you're the best in the business, you know. I want you to do this.
So Dylan and I went in my office. He said, you know, I've done the word trip. I want to do the music trip. He was talking about initial folk Dylan, the Woody Guthrie Dylan, down the road, rambling and scrambling, guitar on the back, 11.5-bar segments, wrong notes, whatever, all of which were totally mandatory to launch Bob Dylan to what he was. He had to do it in the vogue and in the manner of the unrefined but raw and impassioned folk musician. It occurred to him that he wanted now to do something that was more regimented, more refined, broader, and so on. He probably was bemused, I know he was, listening to Aretha Franklin with those gorgeous horns and woodwinds and strings and the background voices, or Ray Charles with those horn charts, not just there to clutter up the record, but as a perfect cushion, as a dressing. He's got New Testament there. He said to me, did you ever get into this? And I said, ain't no use. You're talking to a 62-year-old card-carrying Jewish atheist. No more problem. He didn't try to work on me anymore.
That's part of the trip, is to spread Christianity, the apostles. When you have something like that, and that saved you, and, you want to give it to others and spread the word of the Lord.
And I said, Bob, I think I'd like to take you to Muscle Shoals. I didn't have to expatiate or go in there. He said, sounds okay. Always with the oblique, ironic responses. Oh, no, he's hip, he knows. You know Bob Dylan, and you know that he's 1,000 times more aware of everything than anybody has an idea about him. Slow train coming. I like to think of stands up with any of Dylan's great records. While he was doing You Gotta Serve Somebody, It suddenly hit me. Timmy and Zimmy, how could you miss? So I hit the talk back. I said, Bob, how's this? You can call me Timmy, you can call me Zimmy, but you gotta serve somebody. He said, that's great, let me come in and fix it up. My line wound up in the song.
Did you get a writing credit for that?
No.
Okay.
And it turned out to be the broader, more polished sound. But funky, always but funky.
What did you think of the album cover with the pickaxe for Slow Train Coming?
Didn't bother me at all. They're digging up railroad ties or straightening the rails. Well, I don't know, does a pickaxe supposed to have some significance?
Well, the pickaxe was in the shape of a cross.
It could have been a mezuzah or a Mogan David, I don't care. So they gave him Rock and Roll Record of the Year. And he comes and he does his little acceptance. And he says, I want to thank the Lord and especially my producers, Barry Beckett and Jerry Wexler. My mother had the great line on it. She said, that was really lovely of Bob to give you and God the credit. She said, but he got the billing wrong.
To me, it was actually pretty astounding. In Christian language, Bob was what we call a young Christian. They don't have a lot of training, they don't have a lot of background. And the people I worked with, the other pastors I worked with, we were like, wow, he really nailed it. You know, songs like You Gotta Serve Somebody. See, that's like a fundamental message of the whole Bible. There were some more traditional Christians who I think didn't know Bob and thought, who is this guy? Bob Dylan, you know, he's got a whole history, a whole package that goes with him, and does he even know what he's talking about when he's singing these things? Although generally over time, most Christians came to, if you really listen to music, you went, this is really right on target in terms of the message.
San Francisco is a very strong market for Dylan from the very beginning of his career. Some of his most fervent fans probably live in San Francisco, and probably some of the oldest and crustiest, you know, that were back at the Masonic Auditorium in 1964 are still sticking with him here at this point, and they're showing up at this Warfield Theater. And it's not the guy they expect, it's not the show they expect, it's not the songs they expect.
But what I remember essentially was that half the audience would do a song, and half of them would boo, boo, boo. And this went on for like 15 minutes after each song, and I thought, well, that's the strangest thing I've ever seen or heard of in my life. What does that mean? What is that about?
He talked about religion. He preached. That's why I walked out.
The audience was there to see the Bob Dylan that they knew and loved, and this guy shows up and force feeds them a Christian evangelical program. It was pretty strange.
He stinks! Man, he's the worst. He's bad.
I mean, it goes back to when Jesus walked this earth. I mean, everybody wouldn't accept him.
He don't sing nothing like he used to. That's it.
Whoever was born, they booed because what was being said and what was being presented wasn't, you know, it wasn't for them. Because if it had been, they wouldn't have been born. They would have been listening.
It's a waste of money. Here's a ticket. Here, you want the ticket?
Everybody was stunned. I could not believe what I was hearing. It was Dylan singing clearly about Jesus. The gospel message, especially if you knew anything about the gospel, was crystal clear through most of the concert.
I paid $26 to go in there and see a show, and I could have went to church to see what I saw, you know? I mean, I don't know, I expected something different.
All of us were a little uncomfortable with this kind of exposition of Christian theology in our rock show. Most of us were on drugs, and pretty much ex-hippies that had been going to rock shows for a number of years, and to have this guy who had written so many important fundamental songs in the canon of the music that we were listening to come at us with this gospel thing was a left field shot. I don't think anybody's prepared for it.
It was a never a dull moment on stage, you know, because as usual with him, sometimes it's a little bit controversial, and he welcomes that because he believes in what he's saying and doing, I think.
It wasn't like the shows were bad. I remember the band as being excellent. I remember he had the three black gospel singers really filling out the sound. And in fact, when they played that song, Saved, the place rocked. It was thunderous.
Oh, he was fiery on stage, you know. He's always top of his game.
You know, Satan's called the god of this world, and it's such a wonderful feeling when you get delivered from that. I'm curious, you know, how many of you do know, or how many of you don't know, that Satan himself has been defeated at the cross? I suppose you've been reading the newspapers and watching the TV, and you see how much trouble this world is in. Bad men running loose everywhere, because we know this world is going to be destroyed. Christ will set up his kingdom for 1,000 years in Jerusalem, where the lion will lie down with the lamb. We know this is true.
Dylan had appeared on Saturday Night Live a few months earlier with his Christian music. Why was this so unexpected?
You know, I didn't go to the show unaware that the Slow Train Comin' was a Christian album. But I mean, what's new material? What, 3 or 4 songs in a show usually? I certainly didn't expect Bob Dylan to come out and predicate an entire show on his whole new album, and I didn't expect to be force-fed a gospel program by someone who was not previously known for gospel music and who had assembled this crowd by virtue of his reputation in other fields. So it wasn't like we were going to the Bob Dylan gospel tent. We were going to a Bob Dylan concert. We were, I think, reasonable in expecting some Bob Dylan music.
Here's your husband. Well, I can understand why they're rebellious about it, because up until the time the Lord came into my life, I know nothing about him. It was just as rebellious, and didn't think much about it either way. Never did care much for preachers who just asked for donations all the time and talk about the world to come. You know, I was always growing up with it's right here and now, and until Jesus became real to me in that way, I couldn't understand it.
What was the nature of being slightly turned off, or the disappointment?
I think the main worry and disappointment is that if Dylan continued down this path, regardless of the subject, whether it be religion or farming, it was a very narrow subject matter. And so all of a sudden you might be losing your favorite artist who would write about Masters of War and beautiful love songs, Tangled Up in Blue or whatever. All of a sudden, if he's just going to write about religion and God and Jesus and stuff, that's very disappointing, and especially if you don't have much interest in the subject matter, that would certainly be major cause for pause.
That's right, they want the old stuff, but the old stuff's not going to save them, and I'm not going to save them. Neither is anybody else they follow going to save them. They can boogie all night. It's not going to work.
I read the Bible a lot. It just happens I do. It tells you specific things in the book of Daniel and in the book of Revelation, which just might apply to these times here. Because Russia is going to come down and attack the Middle East. It says this in the Bible. And I've been reading all kinds of books my whole life, and I really never found any truth in any of them. These things in the Bible, they seem to uplift me and tell me the truth.
I spent my life following Dylan album by album and saw his work as extremely meaningful, and artist that I admired above most, if not all. Did I feel betrayed? No, I didn't feel betrayed, but I didn't want anything to do with this. This had no relevance to me. Gates of Eden had relevance to me. Desolation Row, Ballad of a Thin Man, Rainy Day Women. These were songs that I understood. They were about my life too. I Believe in You. Nah, that's not me. There was no me in there.
If one gives it just a moment's thought, it's the most radical of Dylan's reinventions, and it also falls into the narrowest niche. Even going from acoustic to electric in '65, you have this huge swath of people that it's still applied to.
I think my deepest disappointment at the concert was I was hoping for some of the old stuff too.
Oh yeah, I love that stuff. I look at it and I hear it, and it amazes me that it was me that even wrote it and performed it.
In your article titled Dylan's God-Awful Gospel, you wrote, "Genius may be pain, but this guy is not feeling any pain."
That's one of my own personal cliches. Headlines have such a way of coloring how a review is. With a headline like that and a whole number of shows left to sell, I just poured a bucket of water on the whole thing. There was a rash of refunds. My first wife was home in the afternoon and she got a phone call. And she initially suspected that who she was talking to was a drunk African American. Well, he's not home, he's teaching school. What's he doing at school? Well, he teaches there. Well, when's he coming back? Well, he'll be back later this afternoon. Can I take a message? Are you his wife? Yeah, I'm his wife. Well, this is Bob Dylan. and you tell him that he's lost his license to review me. Hangs up. My wife called and said, "You'll never believe who called." I heard the story and went, wow. Well, a license to review me. Wow, the guy is still a poet. In the subsequent years, it is a review I've had cause to think about. I'm not sure that it was the most thoughtful and considered opinion that I expressed in the paper. Well, that's the nature of the daily newspaper game. You go to a show, you get back to your typewriter, you write what's on top of your head, and I gave him short shrift on that review. It's not surprising. I think the audience probably gave him short shrift on it too. But he was asking for it. I mean, he was setting himself up for that kind of a situation, and he knew it. You know, and that goes into that whole Christian martyrdom thing, doesn't it, real quickly? I mean, like, let me go get some stones thrown at me for being a Christian. Well, we can arrange that. It's not that he just didn't give people what they expected. It's that plus the pendulum swing of this Christian theology. If he could have found a more antithetical posture for where the rock scene was at in 1979 than Pentecostal Christian religion, I can't imagine what it would be. It's not like he turned into a Presbyterian or something.
He testified. He told everybody where his heart, his love was, and he testified.
As the years go by and I think about what the guy did and what chances he was taking and what risks and what his motivations were, there's something brave about it, there's something cracked about it too, something out of step with his audience, but something powerfully artistic.
The first album after Dylan's Christian period was Infidels.
Well, the title itself says it all.
Infidels.
Yeah, Dylan's become an infidel. He's no longer a believer in Christianity. I think that one has Sometimes Satan Comes as a Man of Peace on there, where Dylan says, you might be the Fuhrer, might be the local priest. You know, he really, again, he goes to the other extreme, denouncing Christianity.
Ladies and gentlemen, bonjour, bienvenidos and shalom to the 5th L'Chaim to Life Telethon, starring Anna Marie Alberghetti, Marty Allen, Maury Amsterdam, Vincent Vegeta, Bob Dylan.
He felt he was being used by the Christians and went back to his roots in Judaism.
I think the people out there, millions of people that are watching us, that heard us talk about the cry of these books. And these are books that have suffered for 70 years behind those bars of the Lenin Library. Mr. Gorbachev said he's going to give it back. Mr. Yeltsin says he's going to give it back. Evie says he's going to give it back. Bob, tell him to give it back.
Yeah, give it back. Give the books back.
Okay. If Bob Dylan says they'll give it back, they'll give it back.
But the Hasidim would say, when Dylan would come to daven, you know, they'd say he's going to his Shvatz's Shiksa or something.
Se fuera con otro, si formar un buque ligera.
I know Dylan has tried Christianity.
And give plenty of money to Chabad. It's my favorite organization in the whole world, really. They do nothing but good things with all the money. And the more you can give, the more it's going to help everybody.
He's tried Judaism.
They have so much more work to do. Please go to your phones and call and call and call.
Now it's time for Islam.
Bob, tell them what to do.
Call and call and call some more until you get somebody to answer and give what you can. And thanks for inviting me down here.
God bless you, Bob. Happy New Year.
With Allah's help, Dylan will make it through the night.
Okay, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Probably my best friend in the whole world, Charlie Quintana. He was playing with Dylan at the time, he and Ian Wallace side by side. And he invited me to come to the Pantages Theater to watch the show. And no one seemed very happy, or like it wasn't very much fun. And I remember one of the last things I said when I left the theater that night is like, you couldn't pay me to join that band. Gosh, everyone looks so like not happy. 2.5 to 3 months later, I got a call from Charlie Quintana. He said, I need you to fly to Kansas City tomorrow night and join the Dylan tour. I said, well, what am I going to be doing, Charlie? Did Drum Tech die or something? He goes, no, you're going to be playing with Dylan. I'm leaving the tour. I want you to come out and play drums with Bob Dylan. And I said, man, if you're kidding, this isn't funny. Apparently Charlie had told Dylan, hey, look, man, I'm leaving, but I want my friend to come out. He's really good. He'll fit right in. Dylan said to him, well, if your friend's so good, why don't you have him come out and play with us tomorrow night, and we'll see what happens.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Would you please welcome Columbia recording artist, Bob Dylan.
Ian would count us in, or Tony would count us in, and it would be like, okay, man, you know, hold on to your seat and just jump in. The set went on, and there were a couple of songs that I really didn't know. That's when I sort of became aware of the magnitude of what I was doing and the responsibility that went with it. So I thought to myself, what have I gotten into here?
What happened immediately after the show?
And so he comes up, looks me up and down, and says, hey, you play really great, and extended his hand for me to shake it, and he gave me a little half embrace and says, I'll see you tomorrow night. So that night actually turned into the last leg of the domestic tour. My thing was to blend, stay out of the way, don't play while he's singing, and be as professional as possible. Usually when you get in with a group of established cats, it's like, here, do what we're doing, which I did, you know, for that first leg. But I would find out later that's not what he wanted at all. When he got to know me a little better and felt that he could count on me, he would say certain things, but he never told me what to play, which is really strange. How do you do that? Or say that to somebody, here, come join my band, but what would you like me to play? Oh, I don't know, just... Dylan doesn't always leave the breadcrumbs you need as a musician. He just, you know, wants you to come along. The more you played with him, the more you realized that you had to rely on yourself and your instincts and be respectful of the songwriting. Bottom line was the songwriting, his songwriting. "45 feet of rolling decadence." We had a 12-bunk bus. He had what people call in the industry a star coach, like a master bedroom and the whole bit. He had the wardrobe cases were like, you know, like the big ATA size of a refrigerator. And I think my favorite look for Dylan would be the Wyatt Earp sort of gunslinger thing, black knee-length coat, bolo tie or vest or something. I always thought he looked really dashing. And I said, man, I know this is cutting my nose off to spite my face, but you could go out there all by yourself and no one would care if we all went and got dropped in a pit behind you. You'd still bring the house down. But he said he liked having a band, and I told him I was very thankful to be out. They never assumed that I didn't have anything better to do. I would go and play with the great Bob Dylan. It was not like that at all. They asked me if I wanted to come back out. Again, you're asking me, I said. I said, you don't have to ask me ever again. Just give me the dates, and if I'm dead, then I won't come. And when Bob Dylan asks you to go somewhere, you drop what you're doing, you go. Our routine would be do the show, do what's called a runner, which means we're running. As soon as that last chords of It Ain't Me, Baby, ringing out, and it's him by himself, we're already on the bus and gone. And when he goes, that's it. Elvis has definitely left the building. And so there he was sitting by himself, and I thought, well, I got nothing to lose, and go over and talk to him. And so I said, hey man, how's it going? You know, are you gonna eat? Mind if I sit here and, you know, and eat with you? He goes, oh yeah, sure, you know, pull up a chair, and I did, and I pulled out my cigarettes and put them on the table, and that famous right hand of his with the nails reached out and pulled one of my cigarettes out of the pack, and I lit it for him, and he says, so what do you think about the job? And I said, man, it's like, thank you. It's been really great, you know, and like I can go home and tell the whole world that I got to play with you. And he was like, you know, that's no big deal. And so he says, is there anything you want to know? And I said, well, I got about 100 questions, but man, I've been dying to ask you about Ruben Carter. And he goes, oh yeah, I said, do you think we'll ever get to do that song? It's one of my favorites. He diplomatically said, you know, there's kind of no reason to do that song anymore. Let's just do something else. We never did that song or Slow Train Coming. We had just finished a leg of a tour, and he said, how'd you like to come to this party they're having for me in New York? There was Bob. He said, oh, hey, Winnie. And there was Jeff Lynne, Stevie Wonder, Eric Clapton, Tom Petty, Billy Idol, Eddie Vedder. It was like walking into a rock and roll dream.
In a room like that, full of all these stars, are they all kind of crowding up or sucking up to Dylan?
Yes, it was sort of like being in a room with Moses or Jesus or Muhammad or Bob Marley. Everybody else is an underling or someone who Dylan walked point for and made it possible for them to come to the light of the world. When he kind of says something, even if it's under his breath, everyone sort of strains to listen. And Jeff Lynne's no slouch, Petty's no slouch. George Harrison, of course, he's a Beatle. And I love Dylan's story about hearing Sgt. Pepper. Yeah, I get it. You guys don't want to be cute anymore. I've always loved what Neil Young did, and there he was. He came back with us for the first encore, and it was Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat. And I have never, ever, ever played that song, ever, in rehearsal, on stage, ever. Tony looks at me and says, Leopard Skin, And I looked at him and he goes, "It's a shuffle." So I counted it off, and we roared into it, and the place went nuts. Playing Leopard Skin Pillbox Hat with Neil Young was definitely rock and roll dream. And he said to Bob, "Man, Bob, it's about time you had such a good rockin' band. These guys are great." Bob says, "Oh, yeah, you like them, huh? Well, don't steal my band. I'm starting to like these guys. I don't want you to steal them." And he goes, "Oh, don't worry, man. I'm not gonna steal them. I want you to have them. They're so rock. It was really fun to play with you guys." 95 Paradise Lost tour featuring Patti Smith opening was a dream come true for me because I had been a really big fan since day one. And I think she was one of the people that he had actually said to, "Oh yeah, I've heard of you. Aren't you the new me?" He had a genuine affection for Patti Smith. And when they would do that duet with Dark Eyes, oh gosh, I had to stop myself from crying. It was really special.
And your special guest today, Al Cooper.
That was awesome. I didn't know Al was gonna be there. He's doing the part from Positively Forestry. Dylan says, hey, that thing you're doing there, Al, maybe you can do something else, something a little better. And it's the part, you know what I mean? And it sounds really great, and we're just digging it. I was shocked. I don't think many people say to Al Cooper, "Can you play something better?" He's famous for the in-song key change. I've actually heard that. He's never really told me to go from 4 to 3. To me, out of any singer that I've played with, he has the best sense of meter and tempo. If he says 116, it better be at 116. If you watch him really closely, he's communicating all the time. It's body language. The headstock of his guitar, the corner movement this way, the left and the right foot. Kind of look at you like, "You sure you want to do that?" Or, "Hey, that was kind of cool." He can make you feel like on top of the world, or he can make you feel like you belong in the bilge tank, too. But that only happened if you showed off.
Did you get any sense of why the set list changed or why an opening number would change? Was there any purpose, or was it random, or was it just until everybody got sick of these songs?
I would liken that to, Lennon and McCartney saying, "We have to go around the world playing the same 10 dopey tunes," right? Same deal. How many times can you blow in the wind, I guess?
Was being a fan a problem?
It was only an issue when I really wanted to play like a Rolling Stone, like the quintessential version of it. The man whose name was on the marquee didn't necessarily want to do it that way. Dylan had 3 huge volumes of his work. How cool is this guy? He's forgotten more songs than more people will ever write in a lifetime, but he doesn't need the rolling TV screen. Sometimes he'll mess with the words, like the high singing everybody doesn't like. I like it. He'll alliterate every phrase. Sometimes Bob would come to sound check and we'd run over a few things, but after a while, he trusted us with a lot of stuff. Maybe trust is a strong word. He was confident in some of the arrangements. Sometimes we'd put together ourselves, or he would ask, and then we would see what happened. We played the street scene in Atlanta. He goes back there on the drums from Turkey Scratch, Arkansas, give a big hand to Winnie Watson on the drums, and the place goes nuts. And he turns around to me and goes, "Not that big a hand." When he smiled, even though it was for a brief instance, it was like a small hole that opened up in the clouds, and this beam of light had come down, and everybody tried to stand in it while it was there, and before you even got there, it was gone. It was a treat, because from him, what you get is all business, conjecture, and what they don't know, they can only guess. Even if he would, like, put the rack on and do the harmonica, he would go, "Fleet, fleet!" And the whole place, I'd look up in the cheap seats in the rafters, everybody going crazy. I've never played with anybody or seen anybody have that effect on people by doing very, very little, if anything. When he did say something, people strained to listen. Everybody wants to be there be the first one to pick up that little pearl of wisdom or that nugget and put it in their pocket and keep it as their own personal Bob Dylan.
Tell me about Dylan's stage moves.
I've heard it called the boxer, something Muhammad Ali would do, the rope-a-dope. But it is very, very Chaplin-esque. For that kind of money, you want to be entertained. Bob can take care of himself. He can defend himself, and he can actually throw a punch. I've seen him, work out. I was actually walking with him once, and someone said, "Hey, man, that guy looked just like Bob Dylan." And, And then someone would say, oh no, blah, blah, blah. Like, they'd say something off color, like, isn't he dead? Or like, that guy's not still around.
Did you find Dylan to be a religious figure to some of his fans?
Absolutely. Someone who, without him, you know, I wonder what they do in their life. I think it's kind of strange for anybody to follow anyone for 50 cities. There's a girl that came up out of the audience. They didn't drag her off stage again, and she sang a little quasi-duet, Times Are Changing, with Bob. It was great. I've seen them, like, tackle people and hurt them, and I thought it was cool when people don't get manhandled, when they're not really strange and they only want to participate in the music. Everybody wants to see Bob Dylan. Everybody. I mean everybody. Bill Clinton came to see us. Senators came to see us. Sometimes there would be someone noteworthy waiting to see him, like you'd wait to see Don Corleone, or they kiss the ring. He doesn't so much walk into the room as there he is. To me, he always seemed to appear in my periphery or right in front of me. A lot of times he would just walk past everyone. There was always that sort of I didn't get to him disappointment, which I thought was really sweet. I would say the common denominator with Dylan fans is they want to see him. The enthusiasm level anywhere overseas is better. You name it, any continent but the United States. Why do the English have a Dylan convention and we don't?
I was one of Bob's great fans. I really was. He taught me a lot of things. He taught me once you do something, don't go back and try to fix it. Go forward, do something new. And the son of a bitch has done something new every time he did a fucking album. You know, whether it was good or you liked it, you didn't like it, or he didn't sing right or you couldn't understand the words. It didn't matter. It was just him.
Dylan's a very spiritual person looking for a mystical answer to the questions of life. But Dylan really had no answers. What he did was he would paint a picture of what was going down around him.
I think for a period of time, the '66 live tour was a peak for Bob. But when I hear things have changed and some of the new things that Bob is doing, he's just as sharp today as he was then. Nobody can turn a phrase like Bob Dylan. Nobody can use as many words as he uses in one line than Bob Dylan. He's just as good, if not better, today than ever.
You know, mostly people in the popular music field are just full of shit and don't have anything to say. And here's a guy who through his entire life has been seeking to say something. I think what makes Dylan Dylan is that he wants to make those kind of statements. Neil Diamond doesn't. So that's why he's Neil Diamond and Dylan's Dylan. That's why we care about Dylan, and Neil Diamond doesn't matter.
Bob Dylan once said to me, Paul McCartney could be on stage, the Rolling Stones can be on stage, and I'll walk out and everyone will look at me. I don't even get it. I'm not that good looking.
Despite Dylan's popularity, he's not one of the biggest record sellers of all time. You wouldn't put him in a class with Led Zeppelin. Despite his fame, notoriety, his influence, he changed the culture, changed the genre, all of this, there still is and was something of a cultish aspect about Bob Dylan.
I think that the reason some people look at him as a fantasy, because it's hard to believe that someone who's this good, a poet, a songwriter, can create what he's created, is almost surreal.
There's the institution of Bob Dylan. There's the catalog of Bob Dylan. There's the iconoclast of Bob Dylan. There's the whatever personal Jesus bag you want to put Bob Dylan in. And then there's the man. But there are different Bob Dylans. Now, everybody's got their own version of him. Everybody still loves the sardonic wit, razor-tongued 65 model, wisp of smoke for hair, and the Ray-Bans.
I've always felt that Bob is an anointed child. I've always felt that from the time I've met him. He is a special, special person. And you have to accept that he's complex, which he is, and he never wants you to know who he is, which makes him even more mysterious.
If I talk to other musicians who played with him, we're talking about a different guy altogether. Chris Christopherson had said, this guy's got so many sides that he's round. But you also have a lot to do with that too, the mirror. You can plant your own suggestive thought in your brain, and you finally meet the guy. It's usually nothing like you think.
I think I know who Bob Dylan is, actually. Bob Dylan just wants to be a great, great songwriter and wants to deal with truthful messages and wants to sell a lot of records like we all do and get the message across.
Poetry and music do not necessarily go together because poems are not always lyrics. but all his poems were lyrics, and all his lyrics were poems. So I appreciated him as an originator and a founder and a unique spirit.
If someone said to me, what is Bob Dylan? I'd say he's American. He's American.